discussion regarding the Knox County Schools Project GRAD program. So, Dr. McIntyre, I assume we start with you?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. This evening, we're going to talk a little bit about Project GRAD Knoxville. And as the board members know, Project GRAD was a 12-year engagement between Project GRAD Knoxville and the Knox County Schools, and we're in year 12. And so part of what we want to talk about is the redesign process that Project GRAD Knoxville has gone through, and how it envisions what a future engagement might look like with Knox County Schools. And as part of that conversation, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but part of that conversation is really about how Project GRAD Knoxville would like to be really a part of the community schools conversation. And so as we get into this conversation, we're going to start the conversation with Buzz Thomas, who's the president of the Great Schools Partnership, who was the chair of the redesign team for Project GRAD Knoxville. We're going to then move to Jerry Hodges, who's the executive director of Project GRAD Knoxville, who will talk a little bit about what Project GRAD envisions for future engagement with Knox County Schools. And then we'll invite Lawrence Dullock to talk a little bit about community schools. Lawrence has facilitated a working group of a variety of stakeholders around trying to envision what the community schools initiative might look like. And then myself and Missy Massey, who's our executive director of student services, will fill in any blanks or provide any color commentary as appropriate throughout the presentation. And I apologize in advance. When we think about the agenda, I always think, oh, these are two topics we can capture and cover in one meeting, and it doesn't quite work out the way that we think it might. So I apologize for having two pretty meaty topics at one school board meeting. But at this point, I'd like to, what's that?
Yeah, right.
There's actually three pretty meaty topics tonight. Yes, right. But at this point, Madam Chair, I'd like to turn things over to Buzz Thomas, President of the Great Schools Partnership, to kick us off with this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. McIntyre, Madam Chairperson. Before I introduce the Project GRAD topic, I wanted to express my profound appreciation to this board and to your staff sitting and listening to the conversation that goes on here about the practices that are going on in Knox County Schools is extremely encouraging to those of us who want to see Knox County develop a great school system. I've sat in on a lot of school board meetings over the years in other places, and I've never seen a more engaged school board, a smarter school board, or a more talented staff. And it bodes well for the future, I think. And so I just wanted to express that it's great to be in a school board meeting where people are talking about things that matter. So we're getting ready to talk about Project GRAD. Let me just say this. If I had to pick one word to describe Americans in the 21st century, it would probably be this word: busy. And it applies to us tonight. We're very, very busy people. And usually that's a good thing for productivity, and it's a good thing for schools. But sometimes it causes us to, we fail to pause and reflect on where we've been and all that we've accomplished, and sometimes even to celebrate that. So to set up our conversation tonight about Project GRAD and where we might like to see Project GRAD go in the future, I would like to just reflect for a minute on what you have done. 12 years ago, a remarkable public-private partnership was begun in Knox County. I remember it vividly because I was an outsider doing school improvement in the Tri-Cities area, looking in and saying, now what are they doing down in Knoxville? I came down here to your meeting, some of your inaugural meetings, to see what you were doing. You decided to focus on your highest need schools, your urban schools, and you also decided to set very specific goals. I remember your two biggest goals. One was an 80% graduation rate in your two inner city high schools, Fulton and Austin East. If, Bob, you were around back then, your graduation rate at those two high schools was actually below 50%. And the other big goal that you set is you wanted half of the kids who graduated from those schools to seek admission to college. Well, the good news is you not only have met your goals, you have surpassed them. As you know, your graduation rate in these two high schools is now 84%. You have experienced a more than 400% increase in the number of graduates going to college. And we discovered this summer when we did a follow-up blitz with all the GRAD scholarship recipients that your college completion rate for these kids is also about 40%, which is well above the state average. That's worth celebrating. And as Dr. McIntyre reported to you, about 18 months ago, we created a task force, a redesign team, if you will, to try to figure out where are we and where do we need to go and how can we best serve our highest need schools, specifically our inner city schools, in the future. And this task force met many times and deliberated, looked at a lot of data, and came together with a very strong consensus about a set of, I think, very wise recommendations that you're going to hear tonight and get a chance to talk about. So without any further ado, I will recognize Jerry Hodges, Madam Chairperson, with your permission, and he will talk about those recommendations.
And Madam Chair, as Jerry makes his way up to Mr. Hodges makes his way up to the podium, I just want to recognize that actually 3 Knox County School Board members are also members of the Project GRAD Board, as am I. Gloria Dethridge, India Kincannon, and Pam Trainer, and Ms. Dethridge served on the redesign team as well over the last 6 or 8 months. So thank you for all of your service in that capacity. And I also want to recognize that I believe Larry Malden, who's the chairman of the Project GRAD Knoxville Board, is here as well. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. McIntyre, Madam Chairperson and Board. I'm pleased to be here in our last year of this initial 12-year agreement. And I say initial 12-year agreement, I'm here obviously to talk to you about our desire to continue our good work. It really is gratifying to hear Buzz Thomas talk about those things because we have been guilty, as a lot of nonprofits, not talking enough about a lot of the things that we've been able to do to bring value to Knox County schools. But I do want to say it's not our success and ours alone by any means. We've always said we feel like our charge is to help Knox County schools, principals and teachers in those 14 grad schools help kids. And I think we've been very successful in doing that, and we want to continue to be able to do that. Well, I hope I don't disappoint you. I got one slide. So study it carefully. And I think it's going to come up in just a second, at least I hope it does. We want to make this brief, but I do want to talk with you about what our board, the Project GRAD Board, approved December the 6th. After this, there it is, after this 18-month study, we came back with the design of just 4 really major components. This is the abbreviated version. It's a little more complex than this, but I wanted to make it abbreviated and talk about each of those briefly and maybe entertain some questions if you might have any whenever I get finished. Well, the very first bullet that you see, we decided early on in the design process to try to identify what do we do best in terms of trying to help bring that value that I spoke about. And pretty much unanimously, we all agreed it was through student support work that we do. And those 2 areas of student support work are college access, and as we started that study 18 months ago, it was campus family support, which now you know has morphed into the community schools initiative. And so the very first bullet that we have up there is our board said we feel we should focus on student supports in these 2 particular areas, community schools and college and career access. And those 2 components would be our major focus as we move forward in partnership with you, the school district. Now, I think you're aware we're piloting 1 community school site now at Lonsdale. There are 3 pilots, Norwood, Green, and Lonsdale. And we're piloting the one, managing it at Lonsdale. And in this first semester, we have learned a lot. And we feel really good about where we would be in terms of moving into community schools in other Project Grad schools. Of course, that's your decision, but I will say to you that we certainly would like to work with the Great Schools Partnership in being able to manage this initiative, because it is kind of a full-blown campus family support to the max, and I think that certainly is a way to be able to describe that. So that is our interest. Our interest is, as we roll out community schools, that we would be involved in those in the Project Grad schools. And then we've been working very hard to develop college and career access.
Excuse me for
Yes,
just 1 second.
Sir, I apologize for interrupting you. There's an open bid right now on the grade school, or the issue of community schools, and probably we don't need to spend a lot of time discussing Great Schools Partnership involvement with the community schools program and your Project Grad's involvement with that. And also, just if you could just kind of touch on the major topics and not delve into the details so much, that would probably be helpful. It's a bidding issue.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Sanders is absolutely right. There is an open procurement occurring right now, and so I think the idea for Project Grad was to come forward and say, here are the recommendations that have come out of this redesign process. Here's what we'd like to see happen. Here's what we aspire to do, recognizing that there'll be a procurement process that will occur around community schools and where that goes. But I think because the Board of Education is actually one of the largest investors in Project Grad Knoxville, I thought it was incumbent at this time to at least come and talk conceptually about what Project Grad envisions a potential engagement to look like, recognizing that that there is this open procurement issue, and so obviously there's no assumptions made about what the outcome of that procurement would be. There can be no assumptions about what that might look like going forward. But I think this is just to articulate what the aspirations and desire of the Project Grad Knoxville organization would be, and the Project Grad Knoxville board would be.
And is it
Fair enough?
fair to say?
Fair enough. Much better said than I did.
So we're really just getting a report on the summation of that group that worked, that task force or whatever to call it. Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, that's fine. I think you know pretty clearly what our aspirations are, and so I won't go beyond that in dealing with community schools. I do want to speak on college and career access. College and career access is an area that we really have worked diligently by putting a large number of staff in our 2 high schools to try to work with our students in helping them attain their goals. Certainly that goal of higher education is the primary goal, but also in the area of career exploration, and we worked hard on that as well. And so we want to continue to do that, maybe expand it more widely down into our middle and elementary schools. Bullet number 2, our board felt that PGK should continue serving all the 14 current Project Grad Knoxville supported sites. Of course, this would be subject to the annual progress review that would take place, that you all would conduct, and we internally would conduct ourselves. And we feel there's plenty enough work to continue and to be done in these 14 schools, and we certainly want to stay engaged with them because of the relationships and because of the work that we feel like that we can continue to do. Bullet number 3, the Great Schools Partnership and Project Grad Knoxville should continue and work to develop more of a formal relationship to try to capitalize on our savings and avoid administrative overlap. And we're already sharing some staff, we're sharing some back office expenses, and there's being some work done now on what that formal relationship might look like. And then lastly, I've gotten this question for the last 12 years. Really, is there a chance that Project Grad might expand beyond the 14 schools that you're in now? And our board feels that it's appropriate now to begin to entertain that idea that we could have possible expansion at some point moving forward. What that might look like, whether it would be a high school or a high school and those feeder schools to that school, certainly would be up for consideration. But I think it's unanimous among our board that we remain open to that possible expansion pending funding in order to do so. And those are the 4 recommendations that was approved by our board. They feel good about that. Chairman Malden could speak of it if you'd like for him to. He chaired that process. I think the design process was effective. I do want to mention 2 other things that's not on this because it really is outside of our budget, our operating budget, and that is scholarships and summer institutes. We continue to do a scholarship program, and we have over 300 students now presently in college or technical school receiving Project GRAD scholarships. That's about the number we've averaged the last couple of semesters. We've paid out, or there has been, on behalf of Project GRAD, paid out over $1.5 million since 2005 in scholarships. And certainly we believe that that has been a real positive for our program since its beginning. It was the capstone to the program when we began, and I still think it's a major piece of what we're about is the scholarships that we provide students. And summer institutes, that opportunity to be on college campuses for that summer institute experience has been invaluable, and we want to continue that as well. Now, those are 2 items outside of any budget that we would do in terms of operations. The scholarship is kept in a separate scholarship fund, and summer institute costs are paid for by our partner institutions, Mississippi State and University of Tennessee. And so there you have it. Very simply, the 4 things that we decided as recommendations from our board to bring to you that we feel like are important opportunities for discussion on your end.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
India.
I'll let Ms. Guthers go first since she served on this review team. I did serve on a review team and part of Project GRAD, and I know the importance of the work that's been going on for the past 12 years. And I know that as part of that team, we discussed the possibility of continuing serving those 14 schools and the capacity that we serve them now, as far as continue that process, not on a yearly, my understanding you want a yearly extension, or do over a certain period of time with yearly reviews? When you state this here, it says subject to yearly reviews.
That might start to get into the procurement issue a little bit, so we might want to defer that to.
No, this is between Project GRAD and Knox County Schools, so we can't discuss that as far as what we're doing now. I'm not talking about
in terms of what we're doing now. I mean, I think the discussion at the redesign team was around either a 5 or 6 year engagement beyond the 12 years. But I think part of the conversation probably goes to, if we begin to get into the community schools conversation, we begin to get into that role that Project GRAD might play. It does potentially get into the procurement process and how we structure that, how Knox County Schools might contract for and oversee the community schools initiative. So, I mean, the short answer is I think we're talking about potentially, if the board approves and accepts it, a 5 or 6 year engagement, but probably there would be an annual review component to that. And so it wouldn't be an automatic sort of acceptance of that contract ongoing each year, but there'd be a review every year to see that engagement is accomplishing the goals that we wanted to continue to accomplish, and make sure that it's doing what it's meant to do over time.
Okay, yeah, I remember that being a part of that discussion. And also, I thought that we had discussed not only and this might be getting to procurement, you can just tell me that, is that it would be like an agreement between Knox County School and Project GRAD.
That would start to get into the
And
procurement
then
issue.
Knox County, okay, and
Yeah.
then Project GRAD and.
Yeah, so we need to let the procurement process play out and see where that ends up, and see who the successful bidder is in that process.
Okay, so I guess my thing is, I would like to hope the board will consider at least continuing what they have done so far for the past 12 years. and especially the career access piece. But, I think they have done it. They deal with a certain population of students. And as we can see, it has been a positive results. and it would be great to continue that effort. Like you said, people already know each other. They've got the connections. They got the people that's already kind of knowledgeable about that process. So, but I'm just talking about the piece that they're doing already, and not the other piece. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.
India.
Thank you. Gloria, first, thanks for serving on this review team. I know it was a lot of meetings, and I'm really pleased with the results and the, as summarized in this one sheet. I appreciate the work that the whole review team did, so thank you for that. I just want to say I've served on the Project GRAD board since 2004, and I know you guys have served on it since its inception, so I'm really proud of the work of Project GRAD. I've been familiar with it as a school board member, Project GRAD board member, and as a parent of kids in Project GRAD schools. And I've seen amazing things happen, just both, by individual teachers and students and parents. I think when we as a board say we value parent engagement, Project GRAD has been a leading, has embodied that in a really, has been a role model for Knox County schools in doing that, especially in schools where parent engagement is sometimes harder to make happen than we would hope. So I think that another thing I'm pleased with about Project GRAD is I think it's a very continuously improving organization. We haven't been satisfied with the status quo, but responding to changing needs, and also, sometimes, again, I think Project GRAD's been a leader, like, the whole concept of sort of coaches and math and special math and reading interventions, which Project GRAD is no longer directly doing, but that's because Knox County Schools are like, hey, this is working. Why don't we do this ourselves? Because we're the academic experts, and I think that's been a great side effect of this partnership. So, and I wholeheartedly endorse the review team's recommendations about continuing the college and career access and continuing the non-academic supports, because I think those are really essential in the schools that are currently being served and could be huge assets to some other schools too, many other schools. So I also just want to thank the private partners. I mean, we initially started with like 75% private funding and 25% public, and now it's sort of transitioned to the reverse. I'm not sure what the ratios are now, but we had this agreement. It's been 12 years. We spelled it out, and both sides have been keeping up with their sides of the agreement. So, I mean, it's great, and I think it's been a huge benefit to our schools and our students. So, in whatever fashion it continues, as long as we focus on student supports, I think that will be really healthy for our kids.
Thank you.
It is pretty remarkable to do anything in public education for 12 years consistently and successfully. So it is quite a milestone.
Lynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really know who to address this question to. I just want to be really clear on the protocol that we're talking about. We've heard something about community schools, and we're going to have an RFP. Doesn't the board first have to approve expanding the community schools program? We've done a pilot. I assume that will have budget implications, and that we as a board will have to approve that before an RFP or anything. I understand what the team did. I'm just trying to make sure it is clearly delineated for everybody involved exactly what we're being asked to do. So community schools is off the table until we as a board are presented with the premise that we should expand community schools and the budget implications it would have, and then we as a board would approve going forward, and then an RFP, I assume, would be issued.
Right.
That's the first part of my question.
Sure. And actually,
I'm against community schools. I'm trying to understand
no,
the way this is
absolutely.
playing
I
out.
understand. The RFP has been issued. We had a conversation about community schools with the board in the fall, and the conversation was about the pilot and what we were doing with the pilot. The board approved a one-year contract with the Great Schools Partnership to move forward with helping us to manage the pilot around community schools, and had some conversation at that point about a procurement process. The RFP has been issued. The Board of Education would approve the contract that would come from that RFP. And also, the Board of Education would approve the budget for next year.
So that would
with
determine how
regard-
many schools we would do.
It would determine how many schools that we do and which schools and what precisely it looks like. So the Board of Education absolutely has decision-making authority in this realm and will exercise that both through the budget process and through the contract at the end of the RFP
I
process.
just kind of want it to be clear, that hasn't been decided yet.
Correct.
No schools have been identified,
Right.
there's nothing, so I just want the community
Right.
to understand that.
Yeah, correct. And again, this is, I apologize for a little bit of the awkwardness of this conversation. It's because some of us serve on the Project Grad board, and so we're talking about what that might look like from the Project Grad side, but there's a whole procurement process that happens from the perspective of the Board of Education. And so, some of us who are wearing two different hats in this conversation need to just be really careful about that dialogue, and we're trying to walk that tightrope.
Right, and that's why I'm
as
trying to
close as we
be
can.
really clear about
Yep.
that. And then, so my next question is something going to come to us from Project Grad? I'm asking at Project Grad folks here, says something about perhaps a formal agreement, merger with Great Schools Partnership, or something. No matter what form that takes, will Project Grad be coming back to this board to extend a contract to do something, whether or not it has anything to do with community schools or not? I'm just trying to, like these other things, the student supports, and I'm just trying to understand.
I'll attempt to answer that, then
Yeah.
Mr. McIntyre, you
Thanks.
can take that on. That's our interest.
Okay,
Our interest is that we do that. Now, whether or not we're invited to do that by
the
this
board,
group, that's another issue. When we started in 2001, we were asked and invited to present a proposal.
Right.
We did, and it was adopted for a 12-year period. So our interest from the Project Grad side would be absolutely, we would like to present a proposal or an opportunity to be able to continue to do this work, pending your all's interest in us doing so.
Mhm.
Dr. McIntyre?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. Most of these types of relationships would be governed by some sort of a memorandum of understanding or agreement, and I would anticipate that would be what we would look for the board to consider at a future date.
so at some point that would come as a recommendation from you to this board to do that. Okay, I'm just trying to figure out the way this is all gonna flow, because it can get a little confusing. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam?
Yes, I just want to reiterate what my two colleagues who have sat on the Project Grad board with me have said, and that I would love to see this continue on. And to speak to Ms. Fugate, what we may want to understand is that we've really been doing community schools in these 14 schools for 12 years. And so much as the campus family support, I mean, they've been a lifeline to some of the families in those schools. So what will happen to those schools if we don't go forward with some type of understanding in these 14 schools in particular is a very huge concern to me. Because, I mean, I've seen utility bills paid. I've seen people scrambling in the parking lot to get kids clothes that didn't have them. So, I mean, it's been more than just a project. I mean, it has been a lifeline in these 14 schools. I mean, I've witnessed with my own eyes when my own two children were in at least one of those schools. So I just, want us to keep very mindful of that at whatever point we get to.
Thank you. Lynn?
If I could just respond, I understand that point. I was just trying to make sure we're real clear about if we're talking about community schools, then that's got to go through the procurement process, and Project Grad may or may not be a part of the group that gets identified to do it in those Project Grad schools. Okay.
Thank you. This board could choose to continue on with Project Grad in the status quo regardless of the outcome of any RFP. True. Is that true or false?
That the Board of Education continue its current relationship with.
Well, we could renew the contract with Project Grad as a standalone thing,
Yeah,
regardless
that's
of
my
the.
understanding. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
we could, or it could evolve
Yeah,
depending.
or
on
it could be
how we-
right. Correct.
Well, my question would be, if we were going to award another contract to Project Grad, separate from community schools, would that not have to go through an RFP also?
It depends on what what we're asking them to do. I need more information than.
Well, I mean, say we want them to do everything that they're doing right now. It's year 12, contract ends in year 12. We would like to extend that contract 6 years. Just say that simple. It seems to me, I don't know, I won't be the lawyer. You tell me what you think.
It depends on also how much money is flowing and from what sources to what destinations. I don't know the funding structure for Project GRAD to be able to give you an off-the-cuff answer, but I can certainly get that information from the staff and send you an answer by email.
Yeah, I just asked the question because based on just bringing in somebody to speak to teach teachers on Common Core, if that's got to go through an RFP, I can't imagine that this would, because I know it's more money than that.
Isn't this a professional service? I don't see why,
Well,
I mean,
teacher coming, somebody coming.
It is most likely not a professional service. Professional service is defined by the purchasing department very narrowly, essentially to be a professional who is governed by a licensing board, such as an
Like a
attorney
social
or a
worker?
doctor, but not just folks who provide services.
Anyway, well, that's kind of the what if territory
Yep.
anyway. All right, I've got questions. My turn, guys. So what I understood is that when Project GRAD first started, we identified the 14 lowest performing schools as those that we would target with or put together with Project GRAD, correct? In a feeder kind of pattern.
Correct. As much through a feeder pattern as possible, but the 5 elementary schools are not part of either of those feeders. That's Lonsdale and Beaumont, Maynard, South Knoxville, and Dogwood. And the thinking in 2001, it would be unconscionable to bring in a reform initiative as powerful as Project GRAD had the potential of being and not bring in your neediest of schools academically. So therefore, they were invited to come outside the feeder patterns, yes. And then we focused on those schools in the empowerment zone and used that as the parameters, even though it was set up for economic development. We used them for the purpose of trying to identify those schools that were in the center city.
So would today those same schools still be the lowest performing schools? And that's not a judgment on it, just tell me where we are.
Yes.
Okay. How many of those 14 schools, I think I know the answer, one of them is a community school right now.
2 of them are actually.
So
Green
2
is
are-
the other pilot school
Okay,
that's being,
pilot,
yeah.
community pilot. How many of those are also magnet schools?
are also what?
Magnet,
Every magnet school is a Project GRAD school.
okay. And then how many of those are also TAP schools?
7 of the 14 grad schools are TAP schools.
So one of the concerns I have is just the layer upon layer upon layer of programs. And then irregardless of an RFP, if Knox County is going to do community schools, I want Knox County to do community schools, my own view. I don't want right now, although I know there are different groups already and these pilots coordinating them, ultimately I don't want them under other names, if that's at all possible for us. I agree that there are services, there are things that Project GRAD brought to Knox County schools, particularly in the area of college and career ready development and parent engagement, that Knox County Schools was not doing in 2001. I would expect at the end of 12 years, Knox County Schools, if it's really effective, better be doing it. And at some point, how much do you need to outsource to accomplish that? And it's just, for me, a balance of how much does it cost with whatever our input is now and what we've learned over 12 years, how much could Knox County Schools accomplish using those dollars to do what we know? You know, I think it's incredibly impressive that, I think I heard you say 40% of those kids that got Project GRAD scholarships graduated from college, and I'm assuming that's
Those
either
that have used their scholarship.
technical or, I'm sorry, with what?
Those that have used it, those that actually activated and used their scholarship.
Okay.
I wish we
Of
could
those
say.
awarded that were actually used,
Correct.
40%, that's huge. And whether that be 2-year degree or 4-year degree, it's still way higher than the average, which is in the 20%, I believe. It might even be lower than that. But I also would say, on the other hand, so we've got some high-performing schools that go to college and they're turning out a 20% of those who. So my point is, I think we need to focus on these schools, but I for one, before I'm ready to renew any contracts, I have to see, do we need to continue to put layer upon layer upon layer of schools and what's effective and what's not? And this is nothing new coming out of me. I mean, it's something that for probably not the whole 8 years I've been here, but I'd say 6 years, a question that I've been asking and really do not feel like I've ever gotten. So this is not Project GRAD only specific, but it's more administratively, how do I know what's working? It actually flows very much for me from the previous presentation, because we talk about, you know, master mentor, and we talk about TAP, and we talk about, you know, these PLCs and having our coaches, and there are schools that just have all of it, and there are schools that have very little of it. And I want to know, where can we consolidate services, but I still want to keep first and foremost meeting student needs.
If I may, Madam Chair, I mean, I think the point that you make is a reasonable one, and I think we've had lots of conversation about what are the support mechanisms that we have in place at some of our high need schools. And I think the bigger question is, how do we make sure that those are aligned? I mean, a lot of the schools that we're talking about here are also Title I schools. But when I look at the sort of the portfolio of support mechanisms at some of our high need schools, I think we've made a lot of progress in the last few years in making sure that those are actually aligned and not overlapping and not sort of bumping into each other and redundant. I think that we've made progress in doing it. When I think about TAP, you know, that's an instructional improvement initiative versus the work that Project GRAD is now focused on, is really student support and college access, versus Title I, which is additional resources to support the work in schools that have high concentrations of poverty. The trick for us, I think, is to make sure that all of that is aligned. I think we've worked very hard to do that. Right? Do we have it perfect yet? No. But I think we've made a lot of progress in making sure that we align those initiatives around making sure that we're providing high quality instruction in the classroom and making sure that we provide student supports. The reason that the community schools effort, and I think it'll be helpful to hear from Mr. Talk here in just a minute about some of the thinking of the broad working group that has been brought together to think about the potential vision for community schools for the future, is because, like Project GRAD, one of the real benefits is that we've been able to leverage some public investment, has leveraged pretty substantial private investment and other community resources that wouldn't otherwise have been available or accessible to some of our high need schools, and that's made a huge difference. It's meant that the investment that the board has made has been multiplied many times over in terms of the private investment. I think that's also sort of the philosophy around thinking about community schools, that it truly needs to be facilitated and guided and directed by Knox County schools, and certainly everything that happens in our schools has to be coordinated and aligned with what we're doing, but that we can leverage some pretty substantial community resources and assets that might not otherwise be available to us if we truly partner with organizations in the community. And that's kind of part of the philosophy of I guess what we're thinking, part of what I think Lawrence is going to talk about this evening.
Lawrence Tulloch, I'm the president of Cornerstone Foundation in Knoxville, and I'm going to try to get through this without my hand being slapped. We are treading a fine line tonight. It's really important that y'all be briefed on these things as fast as possible, and at the same time, there are things going on that are keeping us from talking about everything. There is a procurement process going on, and as I understand, that procurement process is to choose a lead agency for community schools before you can even talk about the entire plan on community schools. Is that fair? And so we can't give you a plan that talks about a lead agency without that lead agency being chosen. So that's the problem. So as I understand it, community schools as a complete briefing will be on the next workshop. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll be in a position, I believe have been through the procurement process at that point, and we'll have better information to be able to provide to the board. But again, I think the point tonight is to try to make sure that we continue to provide information about the thinking that's been going on. Lawrence and Missy Massey made a presentation a few months ago talking about community schools and where we are, and just to continue that conversation with the board, make sure the board is apprised of what that working group is looking at and thinking about and tackling, so that as that proposal comes to the Board of Education for a decision, it's not the first time you've heard it. It's not the first time you've seen it. It's not the first time we've talked about it. And to get the input and feedback from the Board of Education as we refine and hone what that community schools initiative might look like.
Okay, I do want to try to put this in a broader context, though, so that you understand what's being attempted tonight. 18 months ago, there was a Project GRAD task force working group that was put together that's been mentioned tonight, because we were getting to the end of the 12-year original memorandum of agreement with the school system. I want to mention just a few interesting offshoots of that 12-year relationship before I get into even more detail about that. One is that all the discussion you had here tonight about coaches, there were 5 original components of Project GRAD. 3 of them were instructional coach models: coaching of literacy, coaching of math, and coaching of classroom management. You will notice in the first bullet up there, the other 2 elements, which are student-centered supports, campus family support, which is now morphing into a larger concept of community schools, and college and career access, were the other 2 components. And so, in fact, one of the things that's being talked about tonight, which is the school system doing and paying for what it's good at and responsible for, that is the academic programs and school operations, is shifting to the school system. And that shift really started when Dr. McIntyre got here and procured things like the federal grant for the Master and Mentor teachers in TAP and the funding around instructional coaches. And so I think we can be proud that Project GRAD, as a partnership with the school system, brought the instructional coach model to the town, because that was a national best practice, research best practice, that now you guys are following through with. And so that's not something that Project GRAD ought to do anymore. On the other hand, those other 2 components, which are community resources that can help the schools be better, and additional college and career access supports, even following these kids in college, is something the community can help on. And so that's why the first recommendation there of those 2 elements continuing is important. The second thing I want to point out is that Project GRAD has been a great training ground for school board members. Now, Ms. Kincannon got on the Project GRAD board because she was already a great school board member. But Ms. Trainer and Ms. Destry got interested in running for school board because of their involvement in Project GRAD. So we need to point that out. It's had that benefit also. And then the third thing, which I think is important, is that I can remember sitting in a room with Bob Thomas and Ron McPherson 12 years ago, working out a 12-year budget and sources of revenue and expenditures of revenue for a 12-year public-private budget $21 million from the private sector, about $21 million of redirected expenses within the school system over the 12 years. We're finishing that 12 years on budget. In fact, we may have a few dollars left in the bank account at Project GRAD. But that's remarkable. I think we ought to celebrate that too, because it was a business plan that has worked. It was the first big, major public-private partnership in this community around the school of that scale. And it's been a good experience for both sides. Now, I want to put it in the larger context now. Because of that great experience of a public-private partnership, about 6 months into the Project GRAD work group planning, people in this community were running to Cincinnati to see community schools. There was a whole group of United Way that's taking folks up to Cincinnati. Now, I want to tell you, Ms. Trainer, you hit the nail on the head. Project GRAD's campus family supports is one major component of community schools. And so the hunger for community schools in this town on both the private and the public side is coming in part out of positive experience on Project GRAD. It's coming from a great demonstration at Pond Gap funded by Randy Boyd. It's coming from 3 demonstration projects that Knox County has funded through the school system this year. Now, when we come and talk about community schools and a plan at your next workshop, and we talk about the details of that plan and the same kind of discipline that's gone into trying to figure out sources and uses of funds that would sustain that plan, I hope we're talking about an even more exciting public-private partnership for the future. And this partnership, Chairperson Carson, is intended to be for the entire community. The entire community. So we've had a great experience. And when I came in with Misty and briefed you back in the fall, we were talking about one of the reasons we were motivated to put together a plan then was to support the school system's application in the competition on Race to the Top district competition. Even though the school system put together a great plan and that was not funded in that competition, I think there is still excitement about a potential plan for community schools that I hope you'll be excited about when you see the details. Now, again, without getting my hand slapped, I'll mention just a few high points of what I hope you'll see in that plan. One is that the city is excited about it. Second is the county is excited about it. The third is United Way is excited about it. The fourth is the healthcare community is excited about it. Some key major business and foundation funders are excited about it, and I hope you'll be excited about it. So, when we're talking about the kinds of things that can be in such a community schools plan, the other thing I want you to focus on is really page 17 and page 19 of this document I handed out. This is your bedtime reading between now and when we can bring the real Knoxville plan in front of you. But on page 17 is a case study of Cincinnati where they did community schools system-wide in response to what you're interested in, Chairperson Carter. And on page 19 is part of the promise, I think, of what we might be able to do with community schools in Knox County. If you look at the results of a community schools framework for student success, and look at the first result, it's children are ready for school. In other words, starting at birth, maybe even before birth. And then look at the very last one, result, desired for community schools. Communities are desirable places to live. Now, I don't remember the school system being funded for prenatal care, for parenting classes before school, birth, kindergarten, unless the Great Schools Partnership raises those money for you. And I don't remember the school system being funded for creating desirable places to live. And yet all of those things, and we know it, impact student achievement. The drug house down the street impacts student achievement. And so if we can't align our resources in this community in a way to where the school system is doing what it's best at, which is academic programs and school operations, and somebody else is aligning the resources in this community that get to everything from safety to healthcare, from recreation to child care, from basic needs to public service, we can become the smartest community around at having both great schools and great neighborhoods. So we're really excited about and interested in and anxious about talking about this community schools plan as soon as we're unmuzzled. And I think it'll be our next workshop. Thank you.
If I may just add to that, I think there's some, I think the basics of what Mr. Toak is talking about are really looking at the community schools model, which as we've talked about in some detail with the Board of Education, is providing opportunities to address student support needs and family needs, to minimize distractions to learning, and to ensure that when kids come to school, when they come to the classroom, they're ready to learn. That's the basics of it. Some extended learning opportunities, some opportunities for having partnership relationships right on campus that would address student needs in terms of health and mental health and dental and a variety of different student support needs. And to try to, I think the proposal that the work group will likely bring before the Board of Education will be looking at trying to expand that over time to most, if not all, of our schools at various levels, recognizing that those needs might look very different at one of our Project GRAD schools versus a school that may address a different student population. And I think that, and I think also part of that proposal in that conversation would be what community resources and assets and funding might be available to augment the investment that the Knox County Schools might make in doing precisely that. What type of institutional investment might there be on the part of some of our local government entities, or what kind of investment might there be on the part of the local healthcare infrastructure, or some of the philanthropies in our area to make that a sustainable model over a longer period of time. And that's the basics of, I think, what you're going to see. There's nothing top secret in it, I don't think. It's just, those are the types of things. And I think what we'll be able to say more clearly after the procurement process is completed is what might that look like organizationally, and what might that look like structurally. Who would be the Knox County Schools liaison? Who would be the organization with whom we would contract to manage and work with us to support the Community Schools Initiative, and what might it look like in terms of a rollout over time? So that's really what I think we're talking about. That's where the work group is at this point in time, and this is a group that tried to bring a variety of voices to the table, including our folks. Missy Massey sat on this work group, conversation, and a variety of other potential stakeholders in our community sat in on this conversation. And the idea is to bring that proposal and that dialogue to the Board of Education as we get to a point of making some decisions about the budget for next year.
You know, I guess I would say this. I tend to be very protective as the chair of our agenda. And I'm frankly just frustrated right now. Because when I read this agenda item, it says report and discussion regarding Knox County Schools Project GRAD program. There was no supporting documentation as of last night when I looked. So I trust that that's what the agenda item was. I am always been on record as 100% supportive of the community school approach. I have no doubt that community schools will impact all of our schools. I find it very confusing tonight to try to talk about Project GRAD and to try to talk about community schools at the same time. And I think we've done a disservice to both by muddying the issues and having to step back and say, we can talk about that, we can't talk about that. I frankly just want to chalk this one up to a failed agenda item and move on unless anybody has any objections. Gloria?
If I may, Madam Chair, I take responsibility for that. This conversation that we're having, there are several folks have said to me, we shouldn't be talking about this yet. I feel a responsibility to the Board of Education to bring information to you at the earliest possible point when we can. I don't like you to be surprised. I don't like you to not be aware of conversations that are ongoing. And so, yes, I think as this conversation has played out, it does feel premature. It does feel, it is awkward, and it does feel limited. But I take full responsibility for that because I wanted the board to have as much information as early as possible with regard to the thinking on both the Project GRAD task force and its redesign and the implications that has with regard to it wanting to be in the community schools business. So I apologize for that, but I take full responsibility for that.
And that's fine. But Gloria?
My comment, it has to do with the process, I guess the part that Project GRAD is planning in Knox County schools now. And I'm glad to know why I am on the board and that it was because of Project GRAD. I didn't know that, but thank you. But I know when we first started out, we did have coaches and we were into the academics and they did a good job, and Knox County decided that they wanted to take that, and when they took the reading program, the kids and the urban kids, they were progressing at a rate that was higher and faster than what Knox County did at the time they took it over. But that was because Knox County wanted to take over what they are good at. But sometimes you have people in these schools that know the culture, they know the people, they understand what's going on, they have that relationship. And sometimes Knox County isn't as good as they are. And I'm not talking about any of the administrators. Sometimes they may not understand the culture. They not be able to jump right in and relate to what's going on in these schools. They're talking about a particular population of students. And so if you got someone that's already there and understand and doing a good job, I think we need to look at that and consider that as part of what we're trying to do in order to continue what we have done or what Project GRAD has done for the past 12 years. They have built a relationship. And as good as Knox County is, that you just don't jump up and have that relationship with the individuals in that school. So they're good at it, and it needs to be considered as far as continuing what they have started as a part of what would be in the next 5 or whatever 6 years. Because this is something when the community understands and they understand the community. And Knox County as a school is not necessarily there yet. Knox County School Board.
Stop while you're ahead, Gloria.
Okay, thank you. All I was going to say is not to disagree with the chair, but I am glad, I am the person that it's like a red flag to me in front of a bull when I hear people in the community talking about something that's going to come before the board and I haven't heard anything about it. So I do appreciate this forewarning. Perhaps it would have been more clearly if it had been a Project GRAD presentation and then an update on community schools, because I do think the work is very important, and I'm the person, I take full responsibility for the person who beats up on Dr. McIntyre all the time saying, I don't like hearing this on the street until, I don't like being the last person in the community to know what's being talked about Knox County schools before the board hears about it. So I'll take some heat with you on this.
Well, I agree with you. What I think is that Dr. McIntyre knows that we all want to know what's going on before it's going on. But in this instance, I think if our agenda had said something about community schools, some of those other partners we have with community schools out in that community might have been here. And we took that opportunity away from them. And I as a board chair, don't like doing that. So can we kill this topic now and move on? Because it's much more fun to talk about vouchers. By the way, guys, thank you very much. I do appreciate the presentation. All right. As the board looked a few months ago at our legislative agenda, one of the things on there was school vouchers and our stance on